Yeah, very good morning. Myself, Dr. Ravi Kumar Poluru. Today's topic is elaboration, construction, and transition phases. Yesterday class, we have discussed the life cycle phases. So, in life cycle phases, it is divided into two types. One is engineering, and another one is production. Okay, so this engineering is again divided into two types. One is inception, and another one is elaboration. So, whereas in the production, it is divided into two types. One is construction, and the another one is transition. So these are the life cycle phases. So where this engineering and the production is divided. So actually we have the four types of the phases. One is inception phase. Next one is elaboration. Third one is construction, and the last one is transition. So yesterday we have seen that what is meant by inception phase and how it is very important for the life cycle phases. In inception phases, mainly they are going to concentrate on the requirement, the process, and the documentation. So all the activities must be implemented properly, because the most of the work in the inception, initially they need to consider the planning and the requirements of the materials to do the software project very smoothly. Okay, so today we are going to discuss about the elaboration phase. In the elaboration phase, we know that elaboration phase is nothing but mainly they are going to deal about the architecture. Okay, architecture, or we can call as is a design part. Okay, so here at least one person we required to explain about this architecture. So what are the faults in the architecture and how it will be impacted to the software project. So here in the elaboration phase, it's very easy to argue that elaboration phase is the most critical of the four phases. Why means in the elaboration phase only they need to develop the architecture. So architecture is the heart of the software project. So they need to use the different types of the components, and it will be very useful for the to complete the software projects. And at this end of this phase, engineering. So this in the engineering phase only elaboration comes in. Okay, so they need to face what are the main project difficulties or the risk will be happen. So they need to take the decision whether they need to commit for the production phase or not, because until the completion of the elaboration phase only they need to go for the production phase. So that's why the decision has to be taken before completion of the elaboration phase here. So mainly in the projects, the decision is must be corresponds to the transition. It means the risk should be very low here. Okay, and the operation risk should be very low here, and whereas they need to consider the higher cost risk. Okay, they need to consider the low risk as well as the higher cost risk and substantial inertia. So while they're doing the project, they need to take the decision regarding about the how these operations taking the cost, whether it is a low cost or they're considering the highest cost. And while they're accommodate the process, they need to check that what are the changes in the elaboration phases, such as the architecture, the requirements, and the plan should be stable enough, and they need to consider the risk okay, whether this risk will be mitigated or migrated. So, and the cost has to be taken, the cost and schedule will be considered here because the completion of the development. So that's why the architecture is very important for any software project here. So if the project is completed within the cost and the schedule, then there is no risk at all here. If any problem or faults occurs in the architecture, so the risk will be happen, and they need to mitigate the what are the risk will be considered during the architecture design. So they need to check that acceptable thing, and they need to predict the what are the risk will be happen during the process. And mainly here they need to check that what is the price. So the price should be a fixed price or it can be a dynamic price for the construction phase here. And here mainly in the elaboration phase they need to consider about the architecture prototype. So this architecture prototype must be a iterations, and depending upon the scope, the size, and the risk and novelty of the project. So that's why here whenever they're doing the architecture, they need to check that what is the prototype of the process and how it will be rotated, whether is there any scope will be there, and what is the risk when they're doing this executable architecture prototype. And they need to address at least one critical use case. Why means they need to check that what are the main possibility for the getting for the taking considering the risk here. So that's why at least the critical use case identified in the inception phase. So they need to check that what are the most technical risk will be happen during the elaboration phase here. And also they need to concentrate on the evolutionary prototype of the production quality. So this component has to be implemented for developing the software project here. And also they need to check that what are the prototypes will be there, whether these prototypes can be mitigated specific risk for the design or the requirement trade-offs. So they need to check that the analysis and the demonstrations to the investor. So here the particular at least one person should be there to give the demonstrations to the stakeholders or the investors, because they need to give the elaboration description how this architecture or the prototype will be very useful for the software project. And also the development here, what are the risk will be happen when they're going for this particular prototype, and they need to give the explanation about how this risk can be mitigated while they're designing the prototype or they're considering the requirements here. What is the primary objective here in the elaboration phase? The first one is the architecture as rapidly as practical. So they need to check that not only for the theoretical, they need to check this architecture as a practical one. So here the configuration managed snapshot in which all the changes are rationalized, tracked, and maintained. So that's why this architecture must be considered theoretical as well as the practical, so that they need to verify what are the changes will be happen during designing the architecture. And also they need to use the vision, so baselining the vision of the architecture, and have the high fidelity plan for the construction phase. Okay, so after completion of the elaboration phase, they need to check that what is the plan for the construction, means implementation, and demonstrating that the baseline architecture will support the vision at a reasonable cost in a reasonable time. So they need to check that this architecture can be support for the future in a reasonable cost as well as the reasonable time also. It means within the schedule, and the cost has to be completed. And what are the main essential activities will be happen here? So they need to clearly elaborating the vision, because they need to understand the various critical use cases while they're designing the architecture here. They need to have the clear planning decision or architectural critical use cases. When they're having the critical use cases, it means they need to take the different types of the possibility, whether this use case will be helpful for gaining for getting the project in a smooth manner or not. The next one is elaborating the process and infrastructure. So they need to check that the process and the infrastructures there. So in the construction process, so they need to take the tools and the process automation support. So the tools and the techniques which you are using, the automation has to be supported. Why means the automation is very important to minimize the human intervention and providing the more quality here. And it will be reducing the size line of code also. And here they're considering the intermediate milestone and the respective evaluation criteria. So they need to check that what are the various different milestones they need to use for the evaluation criteria here. And the next one is elaborating the architecture and selecting the components. So selecting the components is very important in the architecture because they need to check that what are the various potential components for the evaluate, and they need to take the decision whether they need to make or buy. The decisions has to be clearly understand. And for the constructions, they need to check that the cost and the schedule within that determined or not. Okay. And the next one is the architectural components are integrated and assessed against the primary scenario. So they need to check that what are the lessons they have learned and what are the various alternative ways for the architecture design will be considered for the requirements are reconsidered. Okay. So they're having the various possibility to verify about the architecture. And what are the primary evaluation criteria will be happen. Okay, so the primary evaluation criteria such as the first one is the vision stable. So they need to check that when they're considering some design part whether it will be applicable for that vision or not. And the next one is the architecture stable. Okay, so while they're designing the architecture, so this architecture will be stable for the software project or not. So they need to verify about this architecture will be compatible for throughout the software project or not. And next one is, does the executable demonstration show that major risk elements have been addressed and credibly resolved? So they need to verify about. So while they're designing the architecture, they need to give the demonstration to the investors or the stakeholders and what are the possibilities of the risk will be happened and whether they have addressed this risk and how they resolve this risk. Is the construction phase plan of sufficient fragility and is it backed up with a credible basis of estimate? So after completion of the elaboration phase, so they need to check that what is the main plan for the construction phase, whether this will be sufficient for the backup or not. So they need to check that each and every constraint whether this will be applicable for the construction phase or not. And the next one is, do all stakeholders agree that the current vision can be met if the current plan is executed to develop the complete system in the context of the current architecture? So while they're designing the architecture, so as I told that the person has to give the executable demonstration to the stakeholders or the investor. Okay, so the investor or the stakeholder will think about whether this will be applicable to the vision or not. If it is met the current plan with the vision and the development of the complete for the current architecture or not, so they will be thinking about whether this architecture will be meet the requirement of the components or not. So are actual resource expenditures versus planned expenditures acceptable? Okay, so after giving the demonstrations to the stakeholders, they need to give the brief explanation about what are the various actual resources and planned expenditures will be happen. So based upon the constraints, so they may the stakeholders may or may not will be acceptable based upon the given clear sufficient information to the stakeholders. Okay, then only they can accept whether the expenditures can be increased or not. Okay, if not, so they will give the some suggestions how to minimize the cost and the schedule during the elaboration phase here. So that's why, so it is very important to the member to give the brief explanation how they're going to expenditure regarding the resources for the actual and the planned during the project. Okay, so that is about the elaboration phase. Now we'll see the production phase. In the production phase, so we have, it is divided into two types. One is construction phase and another one is transition phase here. In the construction phase, as we know that the construction phase is nothing but, so this is we can call as the implementation part here. Okay, which will be developed by the software techies. Okay, during the construction phase, all remaining components and the application features are integrated into the applications. It means in the construction phase, as we know that here the modules will be, it will be divided into a modules. Okay, these modules, or we can call as the components, will be clubbed into a unit testing. Okay, and will be treated as a application. Okay, and these modules or the components can be tested here, and new developed software is integrated where required. So wherever we required, so they are going to develop the newly software developed. And the construction phase represents a production process, so that here they are going to manage the various resources and controlling the operations to optimize the cost and schedule here. So during the construction phase, they try to managing the resources and minimizing the cost as well as the schedule here. And the main sense of the management mindset will be goes into the transition. It means the final delivering of the software project or the product to the end users or the market. So they are going to take that different types of the intellectual property during the inspection as well as the collaboration activities, so that it will be deploying the products during construction as well as the transition activities. And also they are going to check that many projects are large enough that parallel constructions increments can be spawned. So mainly they are going to check, for the more than one projects, they are going to consider the parallel constructions. So these will be incremented. Okay, when they are doing the parallel activities, so the speed will be increased and significantly it will be improved the availability of the deployed releases. So the products can be easily available, and also it will be increasing the complexity of the resource management and synchronization of the workflows and teams here. So that's why the parallel activity is very important for the any projects. And also they need to develop the robust architecture. So when the plan for the robust architecture, it is highly correlated, and also this will be very understandable plan here. And so whenever they're having some critical qualities of any architecture, so they are going to ease on the construction. It means they are going to check that what are the critical observations will be happen and how to minimize this criticality during the construction phase here. And also they required the balanced development of the architecture, and the plan is stressed during the elaboration phase here. Okay, and what are the primary objectives in the construction phase? So the main ultimate goal for the construction phase is they need to minimize the development cost. How they're going to minimize the cost, development cost? It means they need to optimizing the resources and avoiding the unnecessary scrap and rework. It means, okay, when they want to minimize the cost, okay, minimize the cost, first they're going to check that what is the optimized resources will be there, and also the process will be minimized here. The process in the sense here, the scrap work and rework will be avoided. Whenever this process will be minimized or avoided, then the cost will be minimized here. Okay, and next one is the ultimate goal for any software project is they need to provide the adequate quality. Okay, so for the practical, they need to improve the quality of the software project. And the next one is they need to use the useful versions, because initially when they're releasing any software product, so later on they're going to release us the different types of the versions. So we can call as the alpha, beta, or we can call as the other test releases. So this is very important for to release the different types of the versions, because in one time they cannot full-fledgedly they cannot develop the software product. So that's why they require the alpha, beta, and other test releases will be required for releasing the versions for the practicality. Okay, and what are the main activities they required? So the first one is resource management. So resources will be required. So optimized resources will be required for the good hiring people. Okay, when you are providing the adequate resources to the good people, then they can efficiently utilize the resources and to do the project in a smooth manner. And the resources has to be controlled. And the last one is they need to optimize the process. If you're not optimizing the process, then the rework, okay, and the scrap will be very higher. When this will be very high, then definitely the diseconomy of the scale will be increased. When the diseconomy of the scale will be improved, automatically the company will lose for the software project. So that's why they need to optimize the process. Next one is complete component development. So they need to check that what are the various components to build for the architecture and testing the against evaluation criteria. And also they need to use the product releases against acceptance criteria of the vision. So as we have seen that the product releases such as alpha, beta, other test releases will be very important for any software product. And what are the main evaluation criteria will be happen here? The first one is they need to check that is this product baseline mature enough to be deployed in the user community. So it means they need to check that what is the existing defects are not abstractable to achieving the purpose of the next release. So here, whenever they are going to plan for releases, they need to, if any risk will be happen, so they should not stop for releasing the accurate software product. So what are the defects are happened or the obstacles are happened? So they try to minimize and provide the availability and the reliability of the software. Next one is this product baseline stable enough to be deployed in the user community? So they need to check that is there any pending changes are not abstractable to achieving the purpose of next releases. So they need to check that whether enough data is required to develop for the or to release for the user community. Are the stakeholders ready for the transitions to the user community? So they need to check that the approval of the stakeholders, because so in the transition they require the approval of the stakeholders for releasing the software product to the user community. Are actual resource expenditures versus planned expenditures acceptable? So here also they need to check that. So what are the difference between the actual expenditures versus planned expenditures? Okay. And the last phase is the transition phase. So this is the fourth life cycle phase. So that is we can call as the transition phase. So in the transition phase, the requirement and implementation, testing and deployment has to be completed 100%, because this is the last phase which will be need to deploy to the software product to the end users. Okay, the transition phase is entered when the baseline is mature enough to be deployed in the end user domain. So that's why here the requirements and the implementation and the testing has to be completed successfully without having any criticality during these phases. And also they need to check that what is the system has been achieved, the acceptable quality. So they need to check the quality, because for any software projects or any product, they need to check that the quality. So quality should be very high here. And also they need to provide the user documentation. So when they're having the adequate quality and the user documentation, then definitely they can gain the positive results here. And here we have the beta testing to validate the new system against user expectations. So whenever they are releasing the product, the software, so they need to verify about the validation of the alpha as well as the beta here. And when they're testing the beta, so parallel operation has to be maintained, because they need to replace each and every testing element here, and the conversions of the operational databases, and the training of users and maintenance. So they require the training for the users and the maintenance, because they need to understand what is the level of the software. So if they understand easily, they can gain knowledge on the software, and they can easily to do the work on that particular software. And here we have the transition phase concludes when the deployment baseline has been achieved the complete vision. So this is the final phase where the original or the final product has to be deployed. So this has to be meet the vision. And if they're taking some projects, they need to check that what is the life cycle starting point and what is the next version. So they need to release the each and every alpha and the beta versions of the product. And also they need to complete the delivery of the information, because they need to set the third party responsibility for the operation, maintenance and enhancement here. So that's why they need to give the clear information about the what is the delivery of the information for the third party responsible of the operations and maintenance and enhancement. So maintenance is very important here, because when they're delivering the product, okay, so during this time, if any product getting the defect, so the maintenance means that is we can call as the warranty period. Okay, if any product is happened with the defect, so they need to replace the new product, or they need to maintain that particular software to do without any errors here. And next one is the transition phase focus on the activities required to place the software into the hands of the users. So they need to check that what is the main activity of the software, how this will be useful to the users. And also here they can have the several iterations. It means when they are releasing the software, they need to check the different types of the releases. Best example, okay, Windows XP. Okay, they can have the different types of the releases like Service Pack 1, Service Pack 2 and Service Pack 3. So like that they're going to release the different types of the releases. So whenever they're releasing the patches or versions, so this will be strengthen the Windows operating system here. So here the beta releases, generally availability of the releases, and also bug fix. If any bugs will be happen in the previous versions, the new version has to be fix the bugs and try to improve the new releases and providing the stability, security. Okay, and here the user oriented documentation, the trainings users, supporting users in their initial product use. So they need to give the brief documentation, because they need to understand how this software will be useful to the particular clients. Okay, so that's why the training users has to be very important for the particular software. The next one is here the primary objective is achieving user self supportability. So they need to give the self supportability for the software product, and also the stakeholders concurrence that deployment baselines are complete and consistent. So when we are releasing the products, so this should be a complete and consistency of the any product, and it has to meet to the vision. and final product baselines as rapidly and also cost effectively. So when you're releasing any final product, it has to be matched uh, to the software projects, and also it should be very cost effective for the practical. So what are the main essential activities? So the essential activities such as synchronization and integration of concurrent constructions increments into consistent deployment baseline. So this is the final product which will be going to deploy the product, that should be incremented each and every time. And also they need to check that deployment specific engineering. In the deployment specific engineering, cut over commercial packaging, rollout kit, and field personnel training should be uh, given. And also they need to check that what is the complete vision and also acceptance criteria and the requirement sets. So these are the main essential activities which will be required for the transition phase here. And in the evaluation criteria, so we need to take the feedback from the users. So that is the user satisfied? So we need to check that whether whenever we are releasing the software, so not only the software, any product, so we need to take the feedback. Feedback is very important because based upon the feedback, they are going to try to improve the software product or any deviations will be happen. They are trying to minimize the risk here. And next one is are actual resources expenditures versus planned expenditures acceptable? Okay, so they need to verify about the what are the expenditures during the initial studying of the software product or the project, and what is the planned expenditures will be there, whether this will be acceptable or not. So these stakeholders will be scrutinize this data very effectively so that they can have the look whether these expenditures will be they can give the acceptance or not. Okay, so that's why they need to give the brief information about how the expenditures they're going to uh, expenditures on the resources and how this will be allocated for the software product. Okay, so this is about the different types of the phases in the life cycle phase. So in the transition phase, it is the final product which we are going to deploy the product to the market or end user domain here. So after releasing the product, so feedback is very important. So while you are taking, so we need to understand what is the main satisfaction level of the user. If if the user is not satisfied, then they try to change the different software, because based upon the taking the feedback, they need to verify whether the user will be satisfied or not. So who is the target people, and whether the people is satisfied or not. Okay, so this evaluation criteria is very important in the transition phase here, because in the transition phase they need to take the feedback of the users and the stakeholders, and they need to check that whether the this organization is completed within the schedule and cost. Okay, if any expenditures is very high, so they need to give the brief information to the stakeholders, because they need to get the acceptance from the stakeholders for the clearing of the amount. Okay, so these are the different types of the phases, and these are the references. Thank you.
Like, share and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for more updates.